Okay, so welcome to section D. So for this section, we will be talking about spectrum of schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders. Okay, so again, in this section, we focus on the disorders in which a person's experience of reality may become significantly disrupted. Core features may include delusions, hallucinations, disorganized thinking, disorganized behavior, and reduced emotional or motivational functioning. So, these disorders are among the most misunderstood and stigmatized in abnormal psychology. So now we move to section D again, schizophrenia spectrum and other psychotic disorders. Now, why is it one of the most misunderstood areas in abnormal psychology? Partly because it is also one of the most dramatized. So when people hear the word psychosis, they often imagine something extreme or chaotic or movie like. But clinically, what we are really talking about is a disruption in how reality is perceived, interpreted, or organized. In other words, the issue is no longer just mood, worry, or stress. The issue is that a person's grasp of reality itself may be affected. So this section matters because it includes symptoms like, again, delusions, hallucinations, disorganized thinking. We also talk about disorganized behavior and reduced emotional or motivational functioning. These experiences are serious, but they are also heavily stigmatized, so our goal here is not to make them sound dramatic for effect. Our goal is to understand them clearly, clinically, and humanely. The best place to start is with the broader category itself, the schizophrenia spectrum. Now, this slide gives us the broader category, the schizophrenia spectrum, which includes disorders marked by psychotic symptoms, but they are not all identical. They differ in severity, duration, symptom pattern, and impact on functioning. The word spectrum is important because it tells us we are dealing with a family of related conditions and not just one single disorder repeated in different ways. Schizophrenia is the best known example, but psychosis can also appear in other disorders and other clinical situations. So, the key idea here is that what links these disorders are or is a disturbance in reality testing and thought organization. The person's ability to accurately interpret what is real, what is happening, and how thoughts connect can become disrupted. So that naturally leads us to the next question: what exactly do we mean by psychosis? Psychosis refers to a serious disturbance in how reality is perceived, interpreted, or organized. That means a person may believe things that are clearly false, experience things that are not actually present, or think and behave in ways that reflect impaired reality testing. A very important point here is this: psychosis is not a diagnosis by itself. It is a symptom cluster. It can appear in schizophrenia, in mood disorders with psychotic features, in substance induced states, and in some medical or neurological conditions. That distinction matters because people often talk as if psychosis automatically mean schizophrenia. It does not. Psychosis is a clinical phenomenon, not a single standalone diagnosis. So once we understand psychosis in general, the next step is to look at two of its best known features: delusions and hallucinations. Now let's talk about delusions. Delusions are fixed false beliefs that remain strong even when there is clear evidence against them. They are not just unusual opinions, mistakes, or stubbornness. The belief is held with strong conviction and is not easily corrected by logic or reassurance. Common examples include persecutory delusions, where the person believes they are being followed, monitored, okay, to be harmed or targeted. So we also have grandiose delusions, may involve believing one has special powers, a special destiny, or unusual importance. Somatic delusions also involve false beliefs about the body, and bizarre delusions involve highly implausible or impossible ideas. Now, here is the important clinical caution. Not every unusual belief is a delusion. Culture matters. Shared religious or cultural beliefs should not be mistaken for pathology just because they seem unfamiliar to someone else. So, the key point is this: a delusion is not just being wrong, it reflects a deeper disturbance in belief formation and reality testing. And if delusions affect belief, the next major feature, hallucinations, affects perception. So, this time, hallucinations, as we talk about it, we describe it as sensory experiences that occur without an external stimulus. Again, it occurs without an external stimulus. In simple terms, the person experiences something through the senses even though it is not actually present in the environment. The most common type in psychotic disorders is auditory hallucination, especially hearing voices. But hallucinations can also be visual, tactile, olfactory, or gustatory. One thing students often assume is that hallucinations always look dramatic and obvious. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they are quieter, repetitive, confusing, or woven into the person's daily experience in a way that is less theatrical than people expect. For example, a friend of mine showed me a footage, a CCTV footage of his relative that has schizophrenia, and this person is talking to the air, right, and gesticulating as if there's someone he was talking to, but in the CCTV footage you could see that there was none there except from him. So what matters clinically is that the experience feels real to the person. So telling someone just ignore it is not helpful. If the perception feels real, the emotional and behavioral impact is real too. So now we have one symptom involving belief, delusions, and one involving perception, hallucinations. The next major piece is what happens when thinking and behavior themselves become disorganized. So, when we talk about disorganized thinking and disorganized behavior in clinical psychology, what do we actually mean? Psychotic disorders can also involve disorganized thinking and disorganized behavior. And this is important because psychosis is not only about unusual beliefs or unusual perceptions. It can also affect how a person thinks, speaks, and acts in everyday life. Disorganized thinking is often noticed through speech. The person may jump from one idea to another, lose the thread, answer in ways that do not quite connect, or become so hard to follow that the listener cannot make sense of what is being said. And no, this is not the same as being nervous in recitation and accidentally talking in circles for 30 seconds. This is more severe, more persistent, and more disruptive. Disorganized behavior can range from odd or unpredictable behavior to major difficulty managing ordinary tasks. The person may have trouble organizing actions, maintaining structure, or responding to the demands of daily life in a coherent way. So the key point here is that psychosis can disrupt not only what a person believes or perceives, but also how thought is organized and how behavior is carried out. And when these symptoms cluster together in a more sustained and impairing way, we begin thinking about schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is a severe psychotic disorder involving a combination of symptoms such as delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, disorganized or catatonic behavior, and negative symptoms, along with clear impairment in functioning. One of the first myths we need to kill immediately is this: schizophrenia is not the same as split personality. That confusion has survived far too long, mostly because pop culture refuses to behave itself. Schizophrenia affects reality testing, but it also affects communication, motivation, emotional expression, and daily functioning. That means the condition is not only about psychotic episodes, it can touch many parts of life like school, work, relationships, self-care, and the ability to maintain a basic structure from day to day. So when we talk about schizophrenia, we are not talking about one isolated symptom. We are talking about a broader disorder that can affect the whole architecture of a person's functioning. And one of the most useful ways to understand that architecture is through positive, negative, and disorganized symptoms, which we will tackle next. So, positive, negative, and disorganized symptoms. A very useful way to understand schizophrenia is to organize the symptoms into three broad categories: positive, negative, and disorganized symptoms. Positive symptoms are things added to normal experience, such as delusions and hallucinations. The word positive here does not mean good. It just means something is present that normally should not be there. So unfortunately, no, positive symptoms is not a wellness term. Now let's talk about negative symptoms. These are reductions or losses in normal functioning. This can include reduced emotional expression, less speech, low motivation, social withdrawal, and reduced pleasure. These symptoms often look quieter on the outside, but they can be deeply, deeply impairing. And now we have disorganized symptoms that involve disruption in thinking, speech, and behavior, and these affect how well a person can communicate, plan, and function coherently. The reason this three-part model matters is that students often focus only on the dramatic symptoms, but clinically, the quieter symptoms can be just as important, sometimes even more important when it comes to long-term functioning. That is why negative symptoms deserve a closer look. Now, let's talk about the negative symptoms and functional decline. Negative symptoms are often less dramatic than hallucinations or delusions, but they can be deeply impairing over time. These may include flat affect, reduced speech, low motivation, social withdrawal, and reduced ability to experience pleasure. And one reason negative symptoms matter so much is that they are easy to misread. Other people may assume the person is lazy, indifferent, rude, uncooperative, or simply not trying. But clinically, that interpretation can be very unfair and very wrong. For example, a person may want to do more, connect more, or engage more, but still feel unable to generate the motivation, energy, or emotional expansiveness needed to do it. This is not just a personality issue. It reflects disturbance in functioning. So while positive symptoms may be more visible, negative symptoms often play a major role in long-term disability. They affect whether the person can sustain relationships, routines, school demands, work roles, demand, and daily life. And once we understand the symptom picture, the next question becomes, how do these disorders develop in the first place? So what are the causes and contributing factors? Schizophrenia and related psychotic disorders are best understood through an integrative model. That means there is no single cause we can point to and say, there, that one, end of story. Instead, research points to the interaction of genetic vulnerability, brain development, neurochemical factors, psychosocial stress, substance use, and environmental adversity. In other words, these disorders are usually shaped by multiple influences interacting across time. So a person may carry a biological vulnerability, but that vulnerability unfolds within a developmental and environmental context. Stress, trauma, sleep disruption, substance use, and social adversity may all affect onset, worsening, or recovery. So the key point is this: schizophrenia is not caused by one thing, and it is not well explained by one factor theories. Human beings are too complex for that, and psychopathology is not a vending machine where one input gives one output. That brings us to a very important final step in this section: clearing up misconceptions and thinking carefully about differential diagnosis. So let's talk about misconceptions and differential diagnosis. This slide is the slow down before you label slide, because not every unusual belief is a delusion and not every hallucination means schizophrenia. That is why differential diagnosis matters so much here. A person may have psychotic symptoms in the context of a mood disorder with psychotic features. Someone may appear psychotic because of substance abuse. Neurological or medical conditions can also affect perception, thinking, and behavior. And sometimes also it's not substance abuse but merely substance use, right? So here, trauma-related conditions can include unusual experiences too. And cultural context always matters. So the clinician has to ask, what is the full pattern? What is the timing? What else is happening biologically, psychologically, socially, or culturally? Diagnosis here cannot be casual. This is not a close enough section of psychology. We also need to challenge common myths. Psychotic disorders are not the same as violence. They are not split personality, and they are not automatically hopeless or untreatable. Public misunderstanding has done a lot of damage in this area, so part of our job is to replace sensationalism with accuracy. And now let's go to Section E. Let's transition to Section E, substance-related and addictive disorders. While in Section D, we focus on disorders involving reality distortion, psychosis, delusions, hallucinations, and thought disorganization. In other words, we examined what happens when a person's ability to perceive and interpret reality becomes significantly disrupted. But now, in Section E, when we shift into Section E, we talk about substance-related and addictive disorders. The focus here changes from reality testing to reward, reinforcement, craving, tolerance, withdrawal, relapse, and loss of control. So this next section matters because addiction is one of the most judged and oversimplified areas in mental health. People often reduce it to weak character, bad choices, or lack of discipline. Clinically, it is much more complicated than that. So the next question becomes, what happens when a substance or behavior starts taking over the person's routines, decisions, priorities, and functioning? And that is where we go next. Okay, but before that, again, these are the main references grounding Section D, DSM-5, DSM-5-TR, our psychology text by Barlow, Duran, and Huffman, Comer and Comer, and Kring and Johnson, all right? So again, these sources matter because schizophrenia, spectrum, and psychotic disorders are some of the most misunderstood topics in abnormal psychology. So we need both diagnostic rigor and clinical empathy, right? Because if we rely only on stereotypes, we become inaccurate. And if we rely only on labels without empathy, we become careless, right? Thank you so much for listening. Again, this is Section D, all right? Schizophrenia, spectrum, and psychotic disorders. And next, Section E, we will talk about substance use and related disorders. So thank you so much for listening. Again, my name is June. I'll see you in the next drop of the lecture. Thank you. Until next time.